Hey there guys, welcome back for another Warhammer 40,000 Imperium painting video. This week I'm showing you how I painted the Librarian in Phobos armour from issue 11. So as you can see, I've made a little bit of a modification on the Librarian here with his left arm, his sword arm. Obviously it's not painting backwards, I've had it pointing backwards. I've got it pointing forwards as though he's either pointing to the enemy or sort of like he's using it to focus his energy down the blade and at the enemy. Anyway, aside from that little modification, the model is the same model as you guys have got, like I say, just with the arm forward. So all I'm doing here, first of all, is with Kantor Blue, I'm just getting a good solid couple of coats all over the armour areas. So that's pretty much just his legs and his arms from he's wearing gloves, so basically the elbow backwards, and also his face mask. Next I take some Drakenhoff Nightshade and apply this all over the Kantor Blue. The idea is that this is going to sit into the recesses and darken that up slightly, as well as darken up the surface of the blue itself. I don't let it pull too much, but I do let it sort of sit on some of the flatter surfaces, just in areas where there should be a little bit of shadow. Obviously I'll go over the whole model with this and then let that dry for about 15 to 20 minutes. Next I take some Macragge Blue and apply this to all of the edges of the armour. So anything where two pieces of armour join and there's a slight gap to them, such as between the shin and the knee plate. Obviously anywhere like you can see me doing here, the top of the foot, all around the sides, just anywhere where there is a sharp edge. This is a slightly thicker highlight than what you would normally do a fine edge highlight. This is just to get the first of the two highlights down on the model. Once that is done, I take a brush with a finer tip and comes to much more of a point, and using some Calgar Blue I just highlight the upper areas and sort of the outermost areas of the edges, going over the Macragge Blue, but keeping this line much thinner, so you get a little bit of that Macragge Blue showing before it goes into the Kantor Blue. And then once the armour's finished, this is what I have at this stage. Right, so moving on to the green parts of the body now. This is the shoulder pad, as you can see I'm doing here, and this is obviously because he's a Dark Angels for my army. So depending on what army your Librarian is in, you would obviously do this shoulder guard in that army's colour, typically whatever their shoulder guard would be. And then here I'm just using the same Caliban Green to do the inside of his cloak. Again, this is just because he is a Dark Angels, and for my army, depending on their rank, where they're from, they either have green or red on the inside. So for the Librarian, I just wanted to do it the Caliban Green. Also, the only other area that I do Caliban Green is his chest armour. You can just see it peering between the folds of his robe or his cloak. That is leather, so most people would do it brown. You can do it brown obviously if you want. I just wanted it to have a little bit more of that Dark Angels colour scheme there, and so I decided to go with that as a green leather, it's like a green dyed leather or something. Alright, so once the green is done, I'm now laying in what will be my foundation colour for the robe. Now, for the robe I wanted to go with a bit of a more urban camo, but I didn't want to use an actual sort of a dark grey. at least for the underlayer. So I'm using here Fenrisian Grey, and obviously I will apply this over all the robes, and also the part of the robe or pouch, whatever it is that comes over the backpack. Obviously while I'm doing this, I am doing the backpack as well. Once the Fenrisian Grey has dried, I'm now applying a wash that is a mix of Drakenhoff Nightshade, or 2 parts Drakenhoff Nightshade and 1 part Nuln Oil, and then thinned down ever so slightly with a drop or 2 of water. And all I'm doing is applying this all over the Fenrisian Grey cloak, and as you can see, I'm letting this sit in the sort of the grooves and the folds of the cloak, and just letting it stain the rest. Anywhere that pulls up, such as the small area you can see trying to pull down the bottom there, I'll just go back in and absorb that with a dry brush, obviously with no wash on the brush, and that will just soak that back up. And if it soaks too much, then obviously I can go back in and reapply it once this layer has dried. I'll then again set that aside for about 15 to 20 minutes to let that dry. Once the wash has dried, I'm now taking some thinned down Abbadon Black and just marking in rough shapes, sort of angles and triangles, squares, things like that. Just any kind of sort of rough shape to break up the Fenrisian Grey. And obviously, like I said, this is going to be a bit more of an urban camouflage, so I'm working with more sort of sharp and jagged angles on these shapes rather than rounded edges. But I'll go in and get these. Once I'm happy with where they are, then I'll apply obviously a couple of coats over each one to get them dark, and then using a finer brush I'll just go in and crisp up any any edges that have sort of lost their shape a little bit. So once I've got my black shapes down, I'm now taking some Eshin Grey, or at least I believe it's Eshin Grey. It may possibly be Administratum Grey, but obviously any type of grey, anything that is darker than the Fenrisian, lighter than the black, then we have a usable grey. But I'm pretty sure it was Eshin. So all I'm doing here now is doing similar kind of shapes, sharp edged angles, but I'm overlapping these over the black shapes and also the blue. Now they don't overlap everything. They don't, they could be half on a blue and a black. They could go across a blue and 2 blacks. Just any kind of random patterns. Again, just to break up the Fenrisian Grey, but leaving some smaller Fenrisian Grey shapes throughout the camouflage cloak. And then same as before, I'll once I've got these marked in where I want them, I then just go in very carefully and neaten up any edges and points. Right, so with the cloak now finished, I'm just taking some Iron Breaker and applying this to the blade of the sword, and I've also now gone ahead and affixed his backpack to him. Obviously all of the area behind I've now done, so there isn't anything to worry about there, so I can fit the backpack and then go on and paint the silver areas there. And that is, as usual, the slight trim that I get around the vents at the top of the pack, and also the 4 square vents at the bottom of the pack. He's also got a set of keys on him that I do in this as well, and also his face mask. I decided to do the rebreather parts, so the I assume it would be replaceable parts on the sides, either side of the mask, in Iron Breaker as well, just to break the mask up a little bit. Right, so moving back to the green of the armour, I'm just taking a 50-50 mix of Warpstone Glow and Caliban Green and thinned it down slightly so that when it goes on it will be a little bit brighter, and then as it dries that will become a little bit darker as the it's not so opaque. What I can then do is build this up to a slightly brighter colour and add in some highlights just with layering within the rounded area and staying away from the two endpoints. I then do this also on the chest piece, just down where the stitches are that or buttons, whatever they are, that join the two leather pieces, the two halves together. And then also the same, I've done his book in Caliban Green as well, and so I'll edge highlight the book with this same mix. Next I take some Abbadon Black and I apply this to all of the areas that I want gold. Normally I would apply this to anything that has any kind of metallic to it, as I feel that it stands out brighter, but because of what I'll be doing with the sword, I felt that it didn't really need the Abbadon Black underneath. Obviously I'm working in my way through the piece at sort of a section at a time. If you work colours at a time, then obviously you could do all of this black area at the same time you do the jagged shapes on the cloak. But obviously for me this is just the way that I like to work. So moving on to the gloves that he's wearing, I did originally consider doing these in green, just obviously because he's a Dark Angel, but I felt that it would have been too much green on the model for a Librarian. So what I've done instead is taking some Rhinox Hide, as it has that slightly reddish tint to it, and I'm just going to apply these, or apply this, to the gloves. Next I take some Doombull Brown, again because it has a slightly reddish tint to it, it works well with the Rhinox Hide for a leather look, and I give this give the gloves an edge highlight with it, but as you can see I'm very jabbed stippling at the leather or at the top portions of the glove to give it a slightly lighter colour of this Doombull Brown. Now this is thinned, so again it goes on a little bit brighter, and then as it dries it darkens down as it's not so opaque that the underlying Rhinox Hide shows through. And then to just finish off the leather gloves, I use some Tuskor fur and just take this, as you can see, across the knuckles, across any folds and creases, just on the edges of them and on the outer edge of the glove. Basically just a nice clean edge highlight to the gloves. Okay, so for the coiled pipes or cables, whatever it is he has down his chest here, as well as leading up to his backpack and the one on his sword arm, I'm simply using some Screaming Bell, just slightly thinned down as always, and a couple of coats, and that is it for that. Nice and simple. I didn't want to go super detailed with highlighting the Screaming Bell on this area, so just some straight open Screaming Bell, and Bob's your uncle, as they say. Alright, so moving on to the golds now. I'm just using some Retributor Armour, and as you can see I'm applying this to the hilt area of the sword, the crossguard, and also the pommel of the sword, so the bit at the base of the handle. Also his belt buckle, the small piece at the end of his belt, right by the the pistol holster, and also his neck emblem. I then went and did the same for the corners of the book on his back, as well as the buckle, the small skull that his purity seals are attached to, and the small skull on the center of his backpack. And then he does have a couple of small skulls, plenty of skulls on this guy, on his gloves that I did do in this Retributor Armour also. Okay, so for this next bit, I wanted to experiment with highlighting or overlighting the sword. I'm not really sure what the glazing, I suppose, the sword. So what I'm doing is I'm using a mix of Fenrisian Grey, Drakenhoff Nightshade and Lahmian Medium, and to basically get this thinned down blue grey. The Drakenhoff Nightshade itself is a bit too dark blue, so I use the Fenrisian Grey just to mute it down a little bit. I then apply this in a couple of layers over the weapon. Now all I'm doing here is just trying to get it off of the gold. In hindsight, I should have just not done that bit of gold until after I'd done the blade. I then let it dry, and then as you can see, I'm just adding a little bit more to get it to work down the blade. As it dries, or once it's dried, I'll then go in with a layer from about halfway back or 2/3 of the way up the blade, coming back towards the handle, and then a final layer 1/3 of the way coming back towards the handle, obviously letting it dry in between each layer. Okay, so between painting the layers on the blade while they are drying, I'm just taking some Morghast Bone and using this on the purity seals that are coming off of his waist. So obviously I give these a couple of thin coats, get them nice and opaque, and then I'll give them a wash with Seraphim sepia. This has a sort of obviously a bit of a reddish brown to it, which gives it a nice parchment look to these areas. I'll also apply a wash to the skin of his face with a wash of Reikland Fleshshade, and then obviously I'll let those washes dry and then come back to the next step. Okay, so once the shades have dried, I'm just going in with some Mephiston red for the handle of the sword, and also the page holder or the bookmark that is coming out of the book on his back. I'll let this dry and then just give them an edge highlight with some Evil Sunz Scarlet. Right, and there he is, guys. So obviously I've added a few extra details in this, such as some writing on the purity seals on his hips there. I've put in some lightning effect on the blade, but I'm not overly happy with it, so I didn't include that in the video. I'll probably redo that. And also, obviously, as I've added his base, I've gone ahead and dirtied up the bottom of his cloak and his feet. Again, that's a technique that I've shown in a few other videos before, and I'll probably go through in some other upcoming videos or future videos. But it's basically just a case of stippling a few different browns, going from a darker brown to a lighter brown, going obviously as light as you want to. Just stipple it with a rough ended brush and you'll get an effect similar to this. But that is the end of the video, guys. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope that it does help some of you, give you some ideas or inspiration for your models. If you have enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet subscribed, please consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you have recently subscribed, a huge warm welcome to you. Thank you ever so much for your support. But until next time, guys, that is all from me, so take it easy and keep painting those minis.